so happy we alive.
So the doctor isn't technically prescribing a medicine, and the patient's taking it with the doctor's advice. Now, it's sort of the lawyers would call it distinction without a difference. But the distinction is regarded as important. What it involves really is taking a very detailed history from the patient, looking at any x-rays or records that he has to support his claims, and then deciding on an individual basis if the patient, under the terms of the law, could be helped by the use of cannabis.
And what you've been, I mean, what kind of conditions have you been finding cannabis helpful for?
Well, as you well know, cannabis, the hemp plant, provides so many functions, and in that spirit, so to speak, the so-called marijuana fraction, or the fraction that's used, that's ingested, addresses symptoms of more diseases than any other medication I'm aware of. It's incredible.
Can you give maybe a quick summary?
Well, at the top of the list is pain from almost every cause, especially chronic pain, such as suffered by people with arthritis, or herniated discs, or very traumatic arthritis in various forms. Then there are a host of other less well understood diseases like fibromyalgia, which is also a painful condition afflicting mostly women. It's effective for menstrual cramps. It's particularly effective for migraine headaches. Beyond that, the most famous use at the time that the initiatives were being readied for passage was to control nausea and vomiting.
Oh, right.
That was the nausea and vomiting that was
cancer patients and
associated with two growing groups of patients, AIDS, which had never been seen before, and which was increasing dramatically in the 80s, and also people who were surviving cancer chemotherapy, and that was a population that was growing because we didn't have any effective chemotherapy until pretty much the early 70s. And as that became more effective, there were more and more people who had survived their cancer treatment. And also there was this much bigger population of patients who were being nauseated by medicines of one sort or another.
And I think in the past, I mean, one of the excuses, or not excuse, but an explanation why mainstream medicine has been reluctant to take more of a leadership role in medical marijuana is just our history of tobacco smoking, where tobacco was clearly, at least processed tobacco, is clearly related to cardiovascular and pulmonary disease, and for the most part the medical profession, well, initially we were in the advertisements for tobacco, and so it's kind of like, for anything that's inhaled, I mean, that has been reinforced as a taboo, so much over and over and over and over and over again, and now it's only in the last 2 or 3 years that technologically the advent of vaporizers, where people can ingest marijuana with zero potential carcinogens, puts us in a new era.
Well, it's actually a very complex issue. Try not to bore everybody too much addressing some of those complexities. So, first of all, difference between tobacco smoke and marijuana. You mentioned processed tobacco, and I think that's significant because as closely as we can tell, even though the same vegetable material or similar vegetable material is burned in both cases, the smoke from cannabis is less carcinogenic than tobacco smoke. Another issue is that a marijuana smoker ingests far more, even a heavy marijuana smoker ingests far less of the smoke than a normal cigarette smoker.
All right.
Then there are other ways to ingest cannabis other than by smoking it. Although smoking right now, smoking or vaporization, and by the way, I agree completely with what you say about vaporization. Smoking and vaporization give exquisite control to the user. I mean, the more I talk to patients, the more I realize that they're able to control their effects of their medicine with remarkable precision.
You know, you just reminded me of something you said before we began talking here with the Louisville audience, and that was that from your experience as a physician working with patients with medical marijuana, that your impression was that patients were relatively responsible in their use of marijuana, that the abuse of, I don't know what we would define, abuse of extremely excessive use of marijuana hadn't even been a problem. I mean, that's something that I mean, it's an argument. In fact, I mean, there's a whole gateway theory is based on, you know, it's the devil's weed, it's going to lead to, you know, bizarre behavior and whatever.
Well, most of the people that I interview for recommendations are working. They're either working or actively seeking employment. Mm-hmm. And so they are responsible. And I find that in their use, they work that into the calculus very carefully. And here's an example. Only a relatively small percentage of them will use in the morning before work because they're aware that marijuana may impair their performance of work. So they delay their first use until after they're home from work. Others tell me, and I believe this, depending on the nature of their problem, that they focus better. That they're more efficient at work with a small dose. They're aware of the possibility of overdosing and becoming silly. But then they're careful not to do that. They know their thresholds and their limits. And most patients will also admit to relaxing their restrictions, their work restrictions on the weekend. So they're very aware of the relaxing or the so-called intoxicating properties of marijuana. Mm-hmm. The other facet is that they're far more able to control those properties or to avoid them than the person who uses alcohol.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
So you see kind of a dichotomy. I mean, the drug lawyers would argue that people, they're already using alcohol too much, marijuana is just going to give them one more thing to throw in the mix, or they're already taking so many pills, give them marijuana, it just makes everything that much more messy.
That's really...
You see it as a lifestyle choice between alcohol and...
Well, again, in terms of the individual substances, they're quite different in their effects, and to assume that marijuana is additive to alcohol is silly in the extreme, and it doesn't agree with any of the evidence. In an either-or basis, it's well known and even admitted by police that someone intoxicated with alcohol has very poor judgment as to when he should drive and when he shouldn't, whereas someone intoxicated on marijuana is very careful in his judgment, will usually not try to drive despite his intoxication.
Thousands of hours talking with patients as a surgeon. At the present time, you're now really in this interpersonal focus, finding out not just what medicine or what somebody's temperature is, but kind of having your finger on the pulse of what their life energy is. And so I would think that would even broaden your sensitivity to emotional pain.